podcast, but let's officially get started with our Reimagining Industry Partnership workshop today. We're really absolutely delighted to have this panel of guests and academics who are working in industry partnership. And the idea of the workshop is to be able to learn from their experiences and get some insights about how people who are already working partnership might be able to strengthen those partnerships, or if you're thinking about ways in which you can approach and start to work with industry, what kind of ideas that this session might help you to be able to begin those conversations or take the next step from where you currently are. Just before I begin with introducing the panel and what we're going to be doing, I'd like to recognise that we are zooming in from traditional lands of the Kulin Nation and acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nation on whose lands we are gathered from our various homes today, and want to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Personally, I'm zooming in from Wiradjuri people land in Melbourne, and Monash University does stand on Wiradjuri and Boon Wurrung people lands. I know that John's actually zooming in from Wollongong, so that's a different group, and I'd like to acknowledge all the places that people are zooming in from, the traditional people who have walked upon the land before us. Such a lot of interest in this session. It's fantastic. Obviously, the high caliber of the speakers that we have today, and also the idea of connecting with industry is something that's really important to all of us. And thinking also within the current climate, what will happen with industry partnerships and how we start to manage those going into the future. What sort of things should we be looking forward to, and what sort of things should we be cautious about might be some ideas that we talk about within this panel session today. So within the 1.5 hours that we have, and it's a great generous amount of time so that we can really get into some deep conversations, we'll have an opportunity to hear from a set of 3 different case studies, if you like, around 3 different groups of partnerships, one related to Catholic Education Melbourne, one related to VicHealth, and one related to the Paul Ramsay Foundation. And for each of those, we have academics who are working in that space, and also our industry partner to give their perspectives on different issues and experiences and challenges that they've had as they've worked together in partnership for a particular project. So we'll start off, and I'll tell you a little bit about our panel members and their projects. And then I'll have some questions that I'll be asking our panel members that we've prepared in advance. And then we'll throw open to you, our participants who are tuning in now, to send any questions that you might have that you would like to hear more about. We'll have about 20 minutes where we can have that general Q&A. And then I'll turn over to Sharon, who talk a little bit more about what happens next in terms of our linkage projects and a partnership development grant that we're really excited to be launching through this webinar today. So also I'd just like to extend my thanks to Sharon for organising this whole session, because it takes a lot of organisation to bring together all these different people from outside and inside to have the time to be able to meet with us. So we really, really appreciate the work that you've done. Thanks, Sharon. And also to our industry partners who are making the time today, Simon, Shelley, Anne-Marie and John, who I'll introduce more formally in a moment. We really appreciate your generosity in sharing your time and expertise. It's pretty exciting within the faculty. We've been doing pretty well in the last few years with our linkages, and over $1.8 million that we've secured since 2018. And we really want to build on those strengths that we have started to develop and are consolidating even more than just developing, and to help you to be able to think more about what are the issues and challenges that you see, what does industry see, how do we start to think about bringing those together for productive collaborations. So let me introduce our different panel groups. Thanks very much, Sharon. So the first panel group consists of Dr. Simon Lindsay, Shelley Walden and Dr. Kathy Smith, and Kathy from Monash, and Simon and Shelley from Catholic Education Melbourne. And we were really excited, because I have to say I'm a member of this team too, that in April this year we were awarded an ARC linkage project with Catholic Education Melbourne and Brisbane Catholic Education Office. And the name of the project is Exploring Problem-Based Learning in Schools. And the project investigates the potential contribution of problem-based learning to school-based science, technology, engineering, mathematics, in other words, STEM education. And the aim of the project is to generate new knowledge about how principles defining this PBL approach can support primary and secondary teachers to enhance learning opportunities and build STEM literacy. So as I said, we have Kathy joining us in the panel, and Kathy's specialisations in primary science ed and teacher professional learning. I expect everybody knows you, Kathy, but I will just say that anyway to acknowledge the expertise that you bring. So hi to Kathy. And we also have joining us today Simon Lindsay and Shelley Walden from CEM Melbourne, who Kathy's known for a really long time, and I have had the privilege of knowing for quite some time too. And Simon manages the Improved Learning Outcomes Division at Catholic Ed Melbourne and is an analytic advisor to state and national education bodies in the area of data, education data and evidence. So hi to Simon. And Shelley Walden is science and STEM lead and general enthusiast for STEM at the CEM, responsible for the development and delivery of the STEM science strategy. Sorry, that was a bit of a tongue twister for me there. Incorporating sustainability, STEM education and strategic partnerships for all 334 Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Melbourne. No small achievement there. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Shelley. So our next panel members, moving over to our next group, from VicHealth and Dr. Anne-Marie Wright and Associate Professors Ruth Jeans and Dina Lay from the Faculty of Education. So just to tell you a little backstory associated with this group, in 2018, the Victorian Health Promotion Foundation, as it was known then, was one of several partners on the ARC funded linkage project, looking at informal sport as a health and social resource for diverse young people. So building on that partnership in 2020, VicHealth and Monash come together for the Kids Co-Designing Sustainable and Healthy Environments project. And this project has an important function in putting children at the centre of designing solutions to sustainable and healthy environments and examining the potential that this approach offers children and local policymakers as they work to co-design more healthy and sustainable communities as part of a municipal public health and wellbeing planning. So we have Ruth, that you know very well, whose work focuses on the use of sport and active recreation as community development resource, and particularly to address social exclusion amongst acutely marginalised groups. And we have Dina Lay, who brings interdisciplinary perspectives to this work, to the critical study of health education through from policy to translation into everyday pedagogies and practice. And Dr. Anne-Marie Wright, welcome, from VicHealth, who's the Principal Research Advisor at VicHealth. And Anne-Marie advises on a range of projects across illness prevention and health promotion programs. Great to have you with us, Anne-Marie. And our third group on the panel is from the Q project that I'm sure everybody in the faculty knows about now, this excellent project that has a number of people within the faculty working in it, including its lead, Professor Mark Rickinson, and partner from Paul Ramsay Foundation, Mr. John Bush. So the special, unique thing about this Q project is it's an Australian first study to investigate how research evidence is used in schools and how to support teachers to better use that evidence as part of their everyday work. And over a 5-year period, the Q project is working towards catalysing a major shift in the capacity and capability of teachers and school leaders to understand and integrate the effective use of evidence in their practice. So this is a groundbreaking project, and it has a massive potential to impact professional practice, to start to leverage educational policy reform and empower schools and school systems to make the best possible use of what we know as limited resources. So Mark, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. And your expertise, amongst other things, lies obviously in evidence-informed policy and also in outdoor and environmental learning. And Paul Ramsay Foundation's General Manager of Education, zooming in from Wollongong there. As I said before, we're all envious of him up there, Mr. John Bush. And Paul Ramsay Foundation partners with individuals and organisations to offer new ways to break cycles of disadvantage to achieve lasting change. And John leads the development and implementation of the giving strategy in education. So as I said before, it's quite an achievement to be able to bring everyone together into the same kind of virtual room today. So we're delighted that we can have this conversation and really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and sharing your ideas and experiences. So welcome to everybody, and welcome, of course, to all those 38 participants that I can see now in our little icon at the bottom of my screen who are joining us. But unfortunately, we can't see you at the same time, but we can see your questions. And so as we go along, what we're keen to do is to hear your questions by putting them into the chat, and Sharon will organise them so that when I finish with the questions that I'm going to ask the panel, that we can also then bring your questions into our discussion as well. So after a lot of time of me speaking, let me hand over to our panelists, and I'm going to begin with Kathy. So we'll focus on our first case study group around Monash and Catholic Ed. So Kathy, can you tell us a little bit about what led you to apply for an ARC linkage grant with CEM and with Brisbane Catholic Education Office as it came to it? So talk us through that process of what led to it and then the eventual linkage. Thanks.
Thanks, Mandy. I think there were probably 4 main reasons why I found myself in this really enviable position to be doing an application with 2 great partner organisations. The first was that we as an education faculty had an established relationship with Catholic Ed in Melbourne. We had undertaken a number of research projects with them over many years prior to our application, particularly in science education. And I'd worked with them as a consultant for many years. So we knew the organisation, we knew the people that we would be working with, which certainly made a huge difference, and we knew the priorities of the organisation. And we'd always seen it as a really future-focused and innovative organisation. So it was fantastic to again be working with them. Secondly, I think as researchers, we always want to partner with organisations that value research and understand the contribution that it can potentially to the work that an organisation is doing. Catholic Ed have always sort of been very proactive in this area, but one of the things I think that really defines them as quite a unique organisation is the amount of time and energy they have invested over the years in positioning teachers as researchers and acknowledging the findings of the work of teachers themselves, and using this information to validate and promote the excellence of teachers as professionals, educators within their system. And for us as researchers who have a strong belief in teacher agency, it's so great to work with an organisation that just works on building teacher capacity around decision making. The other thing, of course, was to partner with an organisation that had a strong reputation in science and STEM educational research, and Catholic Ed in Melbourne had been leading the way for many years in that. It had thrived under Dr. Simon Lindsay's leadership, and we knew when Shelley took over that role that it was still going to continue because she's so enthusiastic and so committed to this area of education that, you know, it was fantastic again to be on that journey with them. The other thing, the other reason that really I found myself applying for this application was because while we received the grant in 2020, Shelley and I started the groundwork a long time before that in 2017. And way back then I applied for the Dean's Award for Partnership Development within the faculty, and we used that money to look at some of the data that was coming out of a professional learning program that Shelley was undertaking at the time, with I think about 15 schools and teachers in STEM education. And here was where we really found the issue that was going to frame our application further down the track. We found when we looked at this data that teachers were talking all the time about problem-based learning and what a fantastic contribution it was making to STEM education and student learning outcomes. But there seemed to be a lot of inconsistencies around some understandings around the underpinning principles, I suppose, around rich and authentic problem-based pedagogies. And we also saw that there was a huge diverse range of approaches that teachers were using in schools. Now, that's not an issue because context always drives what teachers do. But at this issue because Catholic Education not only wanted to enhance student outcomes and do something that mattered for teachers, well, teachers were firmly invested in this, They also wanted to enhance STEM education, but they wanted to continue to build their relationships with their schools, understanding more what was happening in schools, what was driving teachers to work in the way that they were working. So this issue had a number of benefits for the organisation if we investigated that a little further. And the other thing is that when we started looking at this topic ourselves, we found a gap in the research. So translating problem-based learning from higher education across to school-based settings had not really been explored very extensively. So we got excited as researchers because it was ticking a research agenda here. And we could also see that it was linking into federal government initiatives around STEM education and their agenda. So it was ticking a few boxes. When I came to Sharon, who was my guardian angel on this process, and she talked about the linkage project, it seemed the ideal way to go because we could then raise it to a national level, and we could, by doing so, add to the financial investment that Catholic Ed was going to make and bring in further research expertise and professional knowledge beyond our faculty into another university, but also find another partner organisation to take this to a national level. And that's where Brisbane Catholic Ed came in. And that was really due to Shelley and Simon because they were involved in the Catholic Network Australia. They could easily identify another partner who would share in the interest in those areas because they knew it would align with their forward planning and their improvement agendas. And so when it was offered to Brisbane, they just very enthusiastically bought into the project. So for all of those reasons, I found myself in that position, relationships, the value of research, doing the groundwork and raising it to a national level, that I had these fantastic partners to work with.
Thanks, Kathy. That's really helpful. And that idea of growing from a seed and noticing what was happening within the Catholic education and teachers and working with like-minded partners, obviously, you know, has a really vital role in terms of the growth of something into the scale that it is now. So what about from Simon and Shelley as the industry partners? If I could hand over to you now, like what were you hoping to achieve by partnering with a university and particularly for Monash in terms of having us as partners in this particular application or generally working with Monash in relation to these kinds of challenges?
Thanks, Mandy. Hi, everyone. I want to start first by saying that we really want to do research in schools and in education. And we want to do research in schools, with schools. We want to research our own practice. We're a learning organisation and we value really highly the sort of data and evidence that comes from researching in schools. In working in a big organisation, as a lot of people would understand it, there's some challenges in being able to do that research yourself internally. And if I take a business lens on it to begin with, I'll outline a couple of the challenges that we do face if we wanted to do the research ourselves versus partnering up with a university like Monash. The first one's just a time element. We're flat out delivering services to schools, and that's our prime role. Particularly during COVID, we've had to pivot and roll out a whole range of other services to schools as well. So, the idea of quarantining a whole section of time to do research well is not something that we have a lot of luxury in, and also we don't necessarily have a lot of staff, human resources that are dedicated to do the research as well. So it actually makes a business sense to actually outsource that time and get another quality organisation to actually do the research and allow us to spend our valuable time and human resources in performing the role that we're employed to do. So there's some really big time benefits that we see as an organisation in outsourcing that time to a university to do the research. I think the other big one is also access to a skill set that we don't necessarily have internally. So by engaging with a quality research organisation like Monash, we get access to a research that we just don't have necessarily internally. It requires really top quality skills and dispositions and a whole network of researchers that Monash has. And, you know, if you want to do research well, you know, it's our view, let's get the experts to do it if we can. And the third one for me is around a sense of objectivity in the research itself. And if we're to undertake our own research into our own schools, you know, that's fine and it's good research, but there's a sense of independence and objectivity that we get when we work with a university and someone like Monash that has a great reputation as well. So, you know, there's a lot of eyes looking at research in education, and, you know, to have an independent, more objective organisation that is looking at it from outside the organisation, I think adds a lot of objectivity, respectability, rigour, robustness in the actual research that we can't do internally ourselves. So, look, I'll hand it over to Shelley at this point to take it further, but there's some of the business advantages of working with Monash that I see.
Great, thanks, Simon.
Yeah. Thanks, Simon and Kath. For us, and working with teachers, there's I think 3 reasons that partnering with the university is really useful. And one of that is just that we've already got schools, particularly some of our senior secondary schools. These are schools that pay, parents pay for their students to go to schools. And so they're wanting to offer a really valuable and valued product to their families. And like many independent schools, some of our schools, particularly some of our more prestigious or well-known secondary schools, are actually doing their own research, and they employ people, often from America, to come over and work with them, and they spend a lot of money in their own research projects. And for them, as Kath was saying, when we flagged the idea of this research about 3 years ago, many of them were quite excited that this would take place with an Australian context, within a Catholic context, and with our own very personal context. And so that was really important. So for us and for them, there's a fair bit of kudos in working in action research. And I think Kath pointed out, lots of our teachers like to feel valued and to actually participate in realistic action research, which moves us from those hypothesised ideas to some evidence-based practice, is really good. And I'm absolutely rotten at doing this. These guys know that I'm a person who goes straight to the hypothesis end game, and it's like, no, you've got to do the research first. You can't just hypothesize the end game. And so that validity and the importance, the credibility of both sides of the occasion, of the side of it, is really important. So for us in that space, then the reputation of working with Monash, and many of our schools, as we said, for the last 2 decades, we've had teachers working in projects with Monash University science education over time, because they've got that depth of expertise in subject matter experts in both science education, but the research into that. And so then we found that we've got that sort of, we need more scientists. There's 3 actual scientists that work within the thousands of people who work at Catholic Education Melbourne. So as Simon was saying, the depth of expertise is not there, and you need to go outside sometime to capture that. So when the schools are undertaking this research, they've been really excited, many of them, about the new ways of learning, the pedagogies. And I think, again, COVID has really pushed that, that notice that we just can't keep doing the same thing. So never waste a good crisis is where we're at there. And so for the teachers, there's kudos. For the schools, there's a lot to be said. The teachers feel valued, the schools feel valued, and we're then enhancing, so it's enhancing us and enhancing them. But by the same token, you've got to make sure that you've got the shared priorities, so that what Monash or a university wants out of research and the papers and all of the stuff that goes there, and what we want out of that has to have a very strong alignment. So you've got to have a really big piece of the pie that both sides are interested in. And that was really important. And for us, that's that selection of Monash in that space, is because of their interest, their engagement and their reputation in that time. And of course, all of this has come out for us out of that wanting to get more kids, for me, engaged in science, and STEM education was the key. And there's been a fair bit of research that's come out, most of it from Monash in the last few years, identifying what it is that drives student motivation, particularly when we start losing kids to the sciences in the secondary years. And that's the understanding the drivers of student motivation. And that was where this project-based learning, the making a difference, and that's part of the particularity of Catholic education, is we could do any great STEM program, but what is it that really drives the engagement and helps us keep many of our girls and many of our students in that whole STEM pipeline, is that element of taking action that matters and learning for social justice. And so I think if we think about it as kudos, the reputation and the importance of science, those are the three key drivers for us. And that's what we sell in liaising with our teachers. And that's where we've been getting the school and the school leadership buy-in. So I think that's probably enough from me to set the scene.
That's fantastic, Shelley. Thank you very much. And also Simon, and I think the points that you both make in terms of complementarity of expertise and having that sense of a shared agenda, which is both local and national, and working together towards that, and where those priorities, how those priorities are shaped by working together, is really important. And we'll come back later to ask some questions of you, Shelley, in terms of, and which is really real for an organisation. You're wanting to move ahead, and we're sometimes stuck in processes that a university can be quite snail-like compared to the speed at which we want a project to proceed, so that we can return to that in our open questions too. So that's great. Thank you. So now I'm going to move to our second case study, and this is a little bit different with VicHealth, and talking with Anne-Marie and Ruth and Dina. And I know that Ruth and Dina have had sort of different relationships with VicHealth than we might have been looking at with Catholic Ed and Kathy. So perhaps if I could start off with Ruth, in terms of just talking with us about how you established partnerships with VicHealth. What is the kind of work that you have been doing to engage with VicHealth? And then I'll ask Dina to talk a little bit about the co-design project that she's been involved in, and then to Anne-Marie about research grants and maximising links between research projects and end users. But let's start with Ruth. Thanks.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, so I've been really fortunate to be a research partner with VicHealth on 2 linkage projects now, and a number of other sort of smaller projects that have come out, I guess, of those partnerships established through the linkage programs. So I guess our sort of relationship partnership, I really started building that around 2012. So probably one of the key points, I suppose, with looking at partnerships is just the time it does take to develop these, and the investment that it takes, and what can come from that over a period of time. So initially, I guess it was sort of the attraction to VicHealth as an organisation that was, very much within the space that I was researching, but also I think, as Kathy talked to earlier, this kind of connection of ideals and philosophies as well. So my research very heavily focused on inclusion and addressing social exclusion, and VicHealth's key pillar is around health equity, and also has a strong focus on community sport, which is unusual amongst some health organisations. So that was sort of fantastic in terms of the alignment, I guess, of my own interests and values, and having VicHealth as an organisation that really reflected that. So at the start of the partnership, I met up initially with people within the physical activity team within VicHealth, and just, I guess, started conversations about sort of the key issues they were looking into, what they were seeing were the key sort of tensions within the field, key challenges they were looking to address, and really sort of engaged in kind of industry events and got the sort of understanding of the landscape, I guess, and understanding what research might be useful. And then VicHealth has a fantastic scheme of sort of formal application process for linkage partners, which is great. So it's a process of expressions of interest and moving through a sort of series of expression of interest to a more fuller application to then be sort of selected as a linkage partner to go into then the linkage process. So it's quite challenging and demanding doing it that way, in terms of, as a researcher, you're going through a series of applications before even getting to the linkage process. But it really helps with honing your project and working out what's going to be relevant for your partner agency and what was going to be relevant for VicHealth. What I guess was key to sort of helping me facilitate this process was, for both linkage grants, I initially started with a small grant from the faculty, so a seeding grant to do a pilot project around what would become the linkage project. So I worked again in that pilot project phase with VicHealth informally, and again the team, the physical activity team, and sort of shaping that research, developing the findings, and really establishing a proof of concept that helped with those linkage applications. So that, again, those small projects were essential in just building the relationship, understanding what VicHealth were looking for, and building sort of trust and a rapport. So those were, you know, really central components of developing our partnership as we sort of move forward, and then progressed into the formal linkage application. Was successful with one in 2014 that was looking more in the sort of community sport, structured sport area, and looking at issues of diversity and inclusion there. And then from that was able to sort of feed off findings from that into looking at this kind of relatively new area of informal participation, and how we might kind of engage with that in relation to physical activity agendas. So the two projects kind of linked off each other, but also I was continually working with the program managers within the physical activity space at VicHealth across both to sort of see where our future direction could go, and again what was going to be really relevant and timely for VicHealth from those research projects. And I guess from there it's just sort of been a kind of establishment of trust, and looking at other projects and other spaces of inclusion within the sports setting, and really, you know, trying to build off and develop the research in other directions from there. So yeah, it's sort of it's been a long process. So this is kind of 8 years worth of work we're talking about here, but a series of steps and increments to really hopefully develop a strong research partnership.
That's great. Thanks very much, Ruth. Yes, and there's been a lot of success there. But as you say, over time, these things have built up through a variety of different kinds of processes, both the process part and the attitude and the trust and rapport part as well has become a really essential to making sure that you have productive collaborations. What about you, Dina? Could you say something about the co-design project that's happening at the moment? That is a very exciting association between VicHealth and Monash.
Sure. Thanks, Mandy. And I suppose the path that I took to VicHealth is a little bit different to Bruce, in that it kind of goes back to the school and food exhibition, and so we were quite purposeful in how we structured the school and food exhibition, and we were really keen to make sure that we were able to engage our key industry partners and stakeholders with our research findings from the ARC that we'd just completed. And so we developed the school and food exhibition, and as part of that we held a policy workshop where we invited all key stakeholders that we knew of who were active in and around school food and food education to the exhibition, and then to be part of a workshop where we engaged policy people and our key partners with our findings. And from that, we happened to have a conversation with some folks from the Sandro De Mayo Foundation, who had just a conversation with Federation Ware about the prospect of a little food festival, which some of you would know of, and some of you have been involved in, which has been lovely. And we built that relationship, and we around about that same time, and I'm not exactly sure of the dates, but Sandro De Mayo came back from overseas and took up the Chief Executive Officer position at VicHealth, and that coincided with the actual little food festival. And so I met with Sandro, and he obviously came to the little food festival, and we had conversations around, in particular, the use of design methods and participatory research approaches with young people to help engage them in thinking about food, thinking about food health and sustainability, and more importantly, how we can use participatory methods in research. And so together, that experience led to more conversations with Sandro over time, and he identified a particular need around working with children and to try and bring children's perspectives to the fore, in particular in relation to policy making. And there's been quite a lot of movement internationally around the use of co-design and co-creation with children and young people to people policy. And so he could see that we had the capacity to be able to do that. And we actually had done that through our research, and it was on display, I guess, at the Little Food Festival. And so he was interested to talk with us about what we might be able to do in and around working with co-design and children in relation to councils, auditing local environments, both physical and social environments, which really lines up very neatly with my research over time around critical health literacies, critical health education, wanting to transform school food education and food pedagogies. And I think together over a number of conversations, we worked towards drafting up a proposal. I met with the healthy eating team. I met with people who are in charge of the childhood obesity strategy. I'm now working with the local government team, but in conversation with all of those people around this particular project. And so it is a very different pathway to working with VicHealth, but I've been able to increase our team and increase our expertise on the team. And so Ruth's part of the team. We're working with Rosie Welch, with Bron in the faculty. We've also working with the Faculty of Arts and also MARDA. And so we've kind of brought forward the ARC team, but also expanded it in order to be able to bring in the expertise we need to be able to meet the needs for this project. So that's how we kind of got
Great, thanks Steve, that's really great. And a question that might come back to you later is about how do you manage when you have all these different people and partners who are all working on a project or a set of projects, and I can imagine there's a lot of administrative issues that you need to keep in mind when you're doing that to make sure that the projects proceed well.
Yes,
That's great, thanks. And Anne-Marie, over to you. Could you talk about connecting with universities generally, you know, how VicHealth thinks about those kinds of connections, and also in terms of what you hope to do in terms of maximising links between research projects and end users?
Yeah, thanks. And it's great to be here and hear all these stories. And I think what Ruth and Dina have spoken about are the different kinds of ways that ideally of how VicHealth would like to work, and that kind of work inspires what we look for and how we structure our research grants, the way we go about our commissioned research. So I'll just give you a little bit of a backstory. In 2018, we had a research grants investment review, and the idea there was to identify strengths and areas for improvement for our research grants program and make recommendations to maximise our value and our impact. And we pulled in information from all sorts of places. From the researchers that we'd been linked to, we did some in-depth interviews with them, recommendations from external auditors, review of research grants programs in Australia and internationally, but also feedback from VicHealth staff as well, who had been involved in managing our research grant projects. And one thing we were particularly mindful of, or a couple of things, was one, that for a long time we didn't want to just fund research for research's sake, not to describe the problem, but to identify ways to fix the problem was a big thing that drove us. And the other was just being very conscious as a research funder. So VicHealth fund research grants and commissioned research, that there's a risk with research that there can be a lot of waste. Some research just never gets to be published, or else it's, you know, on the shelf and maybe never sees light of day for, you know, 10, 15 years. So we really wanted to make sure that the research that we funded addressed the needs of policymakers and practitioners on the ground for new and emerging problems in the area of VicHealth's interest. So I should say that VicHealth is the Victorian Health Promotion Foundation. So VicHealth is just short term for that. And our area of interest is illness prevention and health promotion. So we had diverse interests across sport, education, local government, the arts, lots of different areas. So that's to give you further background. So based on that investment review, we then put forward our new research strategy, which was launched last year, and it has 3 critical areas. So we wanted to focus on strengthening the impact and scale of our research. So that's about looking at funding projects that have practical applications, such as the work of Ruth and Dina, and investigating how to maximise the potential of our research grants and how they can be scaled. So I don't know if you've looked at our research grants program, but in the one that was opened last year and closed this year, some of the key areas we are asking people to talk about is the way they would partner with others, policymakers and practitioners, how they're addressing those end users and the issues that they're finding. And also just keeping in mind from the very beginning, is this something that would grow and could be taken up and become a business as usual way of working? So that's really critical for us. So just back to the research strategy. So we want to look at impact and scale, supporting development of research partnerships. And that's something that's ongoing in the way that we fund our research, but also we're keen to build the capacity of researchers to do partnering, because we don't expect that that's just something that comes automatically. To some extent, it's a learned skill. You have to connect with other people who have expertise in that area. Because as Dina and Ruth have highlighted, it takes a lot of time and development and investment of your own expertise. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we increase the flow of knowledge from research to practice. So VicHealth, we're wanting to be that conduit to support our stakeholders in taking up new evidence and applying it as it emerges. So that's kind of where VicHealth is sitting, and I think what Ruth and Dina have described today are some really good examples of how ideally we like things to work.
That's great. Thanks very much, Anne-Marie, because that's, you know, the broad perspective from VicHealth, and then narrowing down, I mean, thinking about those particular aims that you have and how you narrow that down into projects. It would be nice to come back to you to talk later about how you build capacity. I think that's a really interesting point, that people just don't come with that capacity and you need to be able to nurture and build it. And so how we do that throughout the partners will be a really good one to explore. Thanks. So as Ruth and Dina and Anne-Marie talking about work with VicHealth, and now we'll transition into our 3rd case study around the Q project with John and Mark and the Paul Ramsay Foundation. So first of all, can I throw over to John, representing the Paul Ramsay Foundation today, and ask you, why is it that you or your organisation chose to partner with Monash Education on this Q project? Can you talk us through the reasoning behind the decision to work on this project together, please?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mandy. Let me say hello to everybody from Wadi Wadi country up here in the Illawarra, and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land who've been custodians of it for millennia, and just pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And also just send a bit of joy to all of you who are enduring much tougher conditions than I currently am. Although I've been working from home since March, I at least have the option to go out for long periods of time. So just want to say that up front as well. I want to sort of mention three things, I think, in terms of why we chose to partner with Monash on the Q project. One, really actually sits with Mark, and I think this is a thing that's sort of come out quite a bit, which was expertise that really aligned to our goals and strategy. We really value in the foundation the idea of kind of measurable outcomes, being able to see those things, but also basing work on rigorous evidence, and thinking about how to have an impact on things that we care about through rigorous evidence. And in this case, it's kind of a weird meta thing because it's rigorous evidence of evidence use. So you kind of have that rolling through things. For us, a core part of our work in breaking cycles of disadvantage is through improving quality of teaching. And for us, a core part of that is about improving teachers' ability and schools' ability to make use of research evidence. Going to a point that I think many have raised already, I knew Mark previously. I knew his interest in this area, knew his expertise in this area, and so on that basis approached him just to talk about what might be a possibility of a project that we might work on together in this area. So that expertise that aligned to our goals and strategy was really important. A second one is really an openness to engaging in a partnership. At the foundation, we really do think not of ourselves not just as a grant maker, but as a partner for impact with the folks with whom we work. And I think that probably has different elements to it, but one is, as I've talked about with Mark a number of times, kind of a willingness to work at the edge of his own and the team's capability. And I think this may speak a little bit to what Anne-Marie was talking about, the idea of building capacity. So really valuing the expertise that Mark and the team bring, but also testing and checking the willingness to be open to other kinds of expertise and other skill sets that might be necessary in order for a project of the type that we were conceiving to really take off and flourish. I think another element of that openness to partnership was just willingness to co-design. And so we, went through a period over months in this case of actually working together to think about, well, what about this and what about that? And lots of internal wrangling at PRF, lots of internal wrangling, I'm sure, with Mark and others to kind of get to something that seems like, oh yes, this really makes sense for us to do together. And that has a chance not just to have an impact kind of in an academic way, as I think Anne-Marie was talking about, but that actually can have an impact, in the world, right? Because ultimately what we care about is better outcomes for kids and the different ways in which that may happen through policy take up in practice and those kinds of things. And so really sort of testing and checking that kind of openness as well. I think a third thing for us was really the wider support of the university for the project and what that looked like. And I think that sort of sat both within the faculty and sort of seeing the faculty's strong support, the way Q project would be positioned within the faculty and kind of things that were going to line up behind it that way, but also the university-wide support. So working with the Vice Chancellor's Office and Development and those kinds of things on a project of the scale that we were talking about, kind of knowing that the university wanted to support the project as well and would kind of be there for it. So that for us was a kind of a good sign that this wasn't just a partnership between us and Mark as an individual researcher or the team that he might pull together, but that it was actually a partnership between the foundation and the university as a whole, obviously with kind of Mark and Lucas Walsh as sort of the key drivers of it. But I think that gave us some comfort as well in terms of again, knowing how products shift and change and all of those kinds of things, just wanted to have that kind of wide buy-in on the side of the university as well. I think right through that whole process of kind of working together to figure out what it was, I can't say it enough, I don't think, the degree of kind of openness and intellectual humility that both Mark and Lucas really brought to the process, and that willingness to kind of be in the push and pull with us about, you know, does this work? What impact is it going to have? What about if we thought about this? What about if we thought about that? How can it really go? And that really is I think a mode that we're trying to look for all of our partners to engage in, and really kind of knowing that you know, projects that are going to run over multiple years aren't going to run the way you think they're going to run, and all those kinds of things. So just having that foundation of being willing to work together in a kind of warts and all way, rather than a here, let's tell you the pretty story of what's happening kind of way, was really important as well.
Great, thank you very much, John. That's really helpful. And so, and then Mark, from your perspective, when you think about the sorts of things that John has now talked about, and I should also acknowledge Lucas Walsh as one of the co-directors of this project too, so thanks for reminding me there, John. Can you name some of the particular challenges that you've encountered as you've been developing the project together with John and Paul Ramsay Foundation, and perhaps ways in which you have been able to overcome these, if you have?
Yeah, sure, Mandy. Well, look, let's take the challenge that we've all been facing of the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic as a pretty good test case. And I think, you know, we certainly haven't overcome it, but we've definitely navigated it, and it's a work in progress. But I think three things have really helped us to navigate that productively. And all of those echo many of the points that other speakers have raised, and it's really about being able to kind of draw on the relational capital that we had built up within the team, with the partnership with PRF, and you know, and with other stakeholders. So the first thing has been that, you know, as John's described, it's really true that PRF are a genuine partner. You know, like we were inducted into that right from the first conversation with John and colleagues, in the sense that, you know, there are many philanthropics that talk about their you know, the people they work as grantees, but PRF don't. They always talk about partner organisations. They have a partner forum once a year where they bring all of the organisations they work with across different projects together for a capacity building, you know, very participatory, you know, capacity building event. And I was involved in that even before Q started. So there's a sense that, you know, that's significant when you're facing difficulties, because you know that PRF are an organisation that are behind you. So for instance, they've set up a supporting our partners task force in order to support the various partner organisations to navigate through the pandemic. And so there have been webinars to try and kind of help us to understand, well, what are the social impacts of different scenarios of COVID within Australia? How, you know, what does policy advocacy need to look like now within the current pandemic, etc. So all of that has meant that we've kind of been able to navigate COVID, you know, in response to Q, but from a situation of feeling like actually PRF have got our backs in relation to this. So that's the first one. Second point is just the connection that myself and Lucas already had with John before we even started this work. And that's significant because I was kind of thinking about it in preparation for this, is that John and I have spoken not for so long, but much more frequently this year as compared with previous years, in the sense that we've been able to get in contact. We're continually having to kind of sense check things, problem solve, troubleshoot. And also John's helped us to kind of connect with other PRF partnership projects that have got some expertise that could help us with thinking about going online with professional learning, or going virtual with data collection, or thinking about stakeholder engagement in a different way. he's also helped us to see our strengths, actually. You know, some of the governance structures that we had set up have been really helpful, and he's helped us to kind of see what we've got, if you like. So PRF as a partner, the sort of relationship that we had with John, and then our governance structure. We put a lot of time and effort, you know, prompted by PRF early on in thinking about how we set up governance around Q. So we've got a jurisdiction group, we've got a steering committee, we've got partner schools, we've got a stakeholder reference group, etc. The details don't matter, but what is important is it meant that when we were faced with having to make changes and changes quite quickly, we had a lot of people we could sense check our changes, proposed changes with, how's this going to work? And we realized it needed to be really nuanced because we're working across 4 states, and then within those states, often 2 jurisdictions, you know, a Catholic office and a government education department. And so we really had to check how things were going to fall out. And I think our governance structure really helped with that. And I suppose the only other things I'd say is that 2 principles that have really helped us, and this came from the steering committee, was kind of holding on to our original intentions, but being flexible with our methods and our timescales. That felt really important, and that sort of speaks to you know, the setup of the project. And the other thing that PRF have been very good at helping us is to sort of think about not just the risks, but also the opportunities in all of this. So those would be the things I'd say that have been really significant.
That's fabulous. Thank you very much, Mark and John. And I like that idea of building relational capital that you're talking about. And that definitely is a theme that's gone through what everybody's talked about in terms of the Monash team, in terms of the partner, in terms of the system, I guess, in which you're working as well. And to link that with the current COVID situation, I think is really important for all of us, imagining how we're going to go forward with these kinds of relationships with industry too, because it's not going to look the same as it did before. And those kinds of things that we might have been able to predict are going to be different. And your points about being able to make those changes quite quickly, but with a group that you've built up trust with over time is obviously really, really important. So thanks for that. Thanks for that, Mark, and to John. And so now I'm going to open up for questions directed generally to the panel. So anybody can answer these, or I might start off with somebody, but then anybody can jump in. But as I'm doing that, what I want to invite those 30 people who are now watching and have been watching all of these different case studies unfolding is to send in your questions, because I'm sure that as you're sitting there watching and listening, you have ideas either because you'd like to get started with the partnership and you're not really sure how, and here's some very experienced people on both sides who can talk about those kinds of things, or maybe you're in a partnership and you're wanting to progress to another level and you have a question about that, or maybe there's a challenge that you're facing and that you'd like us to be able to talk about. So please type in those questions now, and we'll be really keen to hear them. So here's my question to everybody, really, and Mark started to answer it, so it'd be interesting to hear from other partners and academics about the current environment. Obviously, you know, there's economic challenges that industries are facing right now, and changes in organisations. Some industries will be, you know, not having the funds that they used to have, and other industries might be building up. So what could you imagine what industry partnerships might look like in the future? Are they going to be different, and what aspects might change? And what do you think that we need to be paying more attention to or more aware of as we start to engage or re-engage with industry through these kinds of challenges? I don't know if any of our industry partners might want to begin to respond to that, and maybe thinking about how their own organisations are changing and how you're thinking about going forward into the future with partnership work.
Mandy, I'm happy to jump in.
Oh, great. So Simon and then John, that would be great. Yeah.
Just a quick one. There's an opportunity that I see coming out of COVID in terms of access to global partnerships, notwithstanding the great relationship that we have with Monash. I think, you know, we've learned now that, you know, you can interact and have partnerships wherever you are around the world. And so I think both from the industry side, looking for universities to partner with, but also universities looking for organisations. You know, that I think the sky's the limit now in terms of anyone in the world that has an aligned idea or an opportunity there. I think that's a real exciting opportunity for us in terms of potential research going forward.
Great, thanks, Simon. Yeah, that's a really interesting point there about what's possible now within this environment. And John, would you like to add something?
Yeah, maybe just two things. And Simon, I think your comment is really well taken about not just looking at the challenges, but the opportunities that may emerge. I really, I think that's right. But more perhaps on the challenge side, I think one of the things we're seeing in the philanthropic sector, as sort of sitting in that industry, and Emery, you may have other thoughts about this as well, is just that the corpuses that sit underneath foundations are shrinking because of the economic contraction, and so just sort of despite the fact that there's really demonstrated need in the community, that value is shrinking, and so there may be some challenge in terms of sort of really scrutinizing kind of what's the value that's going to accrue to society from any of the the things that we fund. Now, the flip side of that is that there is also a pledge that's been sponsored by Philanthropy Australia specifically around like being, if you can actually increase grant making even in this time when your corpus is shrinking, that may be a good thing to do. So it's not all kind of doom and gloom from that from the philanthropic industry, but it's just worth knowing that the way philanthropy is working and thinking right now may be a little bit different. And I think to pick up on a theme as well that Anne-Marie raised, really an increasing focus, especially in these times, on impact through to community and the degree to which research activity can support that impact or substantiate that impact. I just think is really crucial. If you're in the philanthropic world in Australia right now and you're not thinking about those who are doing it really tough and the the economic disruptions that are running through, I think you're probably not aware of the situation that you're really in. So again, the degree to which your research interests and what you can bring can be kind of framed in that way and can have a real practical bent. I just think is going to be increasingly important.
Yeah, thanks, John. And you highlight well that tension between the increased need but the decreased resources too that we're all struggling with as well. And Marie, would you like to comment at all from a VicHealth perspective around this issue?
I think for us and working closely with our partners, something we've had to be really careful about or think about is just that whole idea of agility and the way we design our projects and making sure they think about context and that the context can change and how can we work with that. And I think the interesting thing for VicHealth is we're actually a statutory body. So we are funded through the Department of Health under an Act of Parliament. So we're a government agency. So we are, to some extent, want to be part of the picture of addressing the changing needs within Victoria. And one of the big changing needs are things like food insecurity and I guess social connection and mental well-being. These are many things that are emerging on our agenda as things that need to be addressed. Also, with lockdown, looking at how people can stay physically active, all these factors that are central to VicHealth's action agenda. It's being having good relationship. I like that idea of relationship capital. And if you've got that, it can make it easier to be agile and nimble because you can have those difficult conversations and that you need to have a certain amount of trust to be able to do that effectively.
Yes, absolutely. And your point about being able to recognise where even if the environment is changing, how your research helps to be able to bring better outcomes for those who it is intended, within the current constraints and within the current challenges. Shelley, I don't know if you wanted to add anything from a CEM perspective as well.
Yeah, I think, and even just a personal perspective. So for some of you, I've been around for many years and I've had the opportunity to work for the government. I've worked in industry, in the mining industry. I've worked in schools, and I've worked in cultural organisations like the zoos and science works and places like that. And what I understand is if you want to get buy-in, then you need to know, have a good understanding of what drives the other organisations, whether it's industry or government or whatever else. And so you need to have a really good understanding of what what drives that partner organisation or proposed partner organisation, that shared purpose I was talking about before. And then for us, of course, it's what's a shared moral imperative, because we are a Catholic organisation. So many of those cultural organisations that we actually support, though, like the zoos and the museums and the galleries and Sovereign Hill, places like that, have got a very the same moral imperative, which comes down to, you know, education, but why we believe what we believe about the sort of education we want for our students. So buy-in's really critical.
Yeah, and the alignment with their vision and mission, which is a point that a number of speakers have brought up too, which I think is really important, to have that genuine partnership around what it is that you're doing.
Maybe I'll just
jump in, Dina.
Something. I think that one of the things that's really important for my work is just how much or how often partners drive my research agenda, and that it's a reciprocal relationship, and that really the research that I do on its own is rather redundant if I'm not in conversation with partners. And I know that, you know, publishing in Q1 journals is a terrific outcome, and it's good for impact. But, you know, for me, impact really is about the conversations we have with partner. And if we're interested in bringing about change, that those conversations are really important, and they're reciprocal and not just a one way.
I think the point that you make is obviously really important about what is the desired impact of this. Well, one impact might be in terms of the scholarly knowledge that is developed, but there's also what is the impact on the users, of the people in the community for whom you want to improve, you know, a life opportunity, for example, in thinking about the work that you've done. So yeah, I think that's really important. And also a number of people have brought up that idea. You don't come to each other with a predetermined project. It seems like this is something that you work together on, and part of that process is understanding each other's perspectives and working together to develop something that brings the expertise of the different partners together for a particular purpose. And I see that we have a question here from one of our participants, and this is for Kathy, a question for Kathy. What if someone is not as lucky to have worked as a consultant for several years to build that relationship with partners of similar research interests? How can you think about alternative ways to seek interests of prospective partners? And perhaps we'll start with Kathy, and I'm sure this could be something that other people could answer as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. I've been looking at that question, thinking a little bit about it as everyone's been talking. I think it's certainly advantageous to have had a previous relationship with an organisation. It opens up conversations, and, you know, you are invited into that organisation. But you still, as Shelley said, you still have to spend time understanding the organisation, understanding their vision and understanding their mission. And relationships are something that you just have to keep working at all the time. I think in my situation, there was a relationship already established with the faculty. I mean, in Catholic Education, we had many years ago worked in the Science Teaching and Learning project that John Loughran actually headed up. And so it was a chance to keep that alive, which is really wonderful. But I think it's something that you're always working at. I mean, it might start by doing some professional learning for an organisation, and then you start to build on those opportunities to keep that relationship going, to keep the conversations open, to learn more about the organisation, and to keep working on it. Actually, as someone coming into the faculty, that sounds like it was a great advantage to have had that relationship, but I had to work really hard to keep it alive as I was juggling all of the other responsibilities of becoming an academic. So I think it's an advantage, but there's lots of opportunities that come up in the work that I do where I'm working across organisations, and you can often capitalise on those what seems small little trivial projects where you build up those relationships, and over time it becomes something a lot more significant. But I'm sure other people have information to share there about that too.
I'm going to jump in if
you're great. Thanks.
Yeah, a few suggestions. I'm just reflecting on my own experiences in kind of the, I arrived in Melbourne in 2013, and it was, that kind of timescale to build up the kind of, networks and understandings in order to be able to get something like Q off the ground. I think being on advisory groups is really, really important, because you get to kind of interact with people and talk about the things that are important to you, and you hear others. That's a really interesting opportunity. I think co-presenting with partners is really important. I think often we forget it's important to talk about what we found together, but it's also really important to talk about how we work together. I think more talking, making the kind of the work of partnership work in public rather than just the findings is really important. Mm-hmm. I got a number of people involved as guest speakers in units that I was teaching. So John came, about 4 years ago, and came to the old education building at 7 o'clock one evening, and I gave him a bottle of wine to say thanks, but came and spoke about the work he was doing in a different kind of organisation then, prior to PRF, and that's a way to bring people in to understand all the things that people have said about understanding what matters. Mm-hmm. And I think going to industry conferences, Ruth talks about trying to understand the landscape. Sometimes researchers spend too much time at research conferences, and it's really important to be at conferences where everyone in the room does a different job to you. And I think practitioner conferences are a really important way to kind of understand issues.
That's super. Thanks, Mark. Yeah. Anyone else who'd like to jump in on this idea about, building up partnerships and seeking interests of prospective partners?
What?
No, sorry, go ahead.
I don't mind. All I was going to say is just translation events. So, as a way to showcase your research, but also to invite people to us, or we go to them, and to translate our research findings into palatable pieces. Like, not everybody wants to read a journal article, but what are some ways we can actually make our research accessible and connect with our partners? That's what I was going to say.
So Dina, could you give us an example of a translation conference? I mean, of course, you had the Schooling Food exhibition, and that's quite, it looked fantastic, but I know there was a lot of work involved in that kind of a translation conference. Can you suggest some other ways in which people might be able to do that work?
Well, I guess what other people have suggested is going to professional associations, doing that professional learning when you're invited, if you can. Of course, it's not always possible. But, just an example, in the next month, I'm presenting to the National Canteen Association. I'm presenting to some teachers in Tasmania, to the Western Australian Health Promoting Schools Association. There's something else in there. And so, I'm often involved in presenting to industry partners, to teachers who are our partners. And I always take up the opportunity where I can to share research, but also to set up an opportunity for them to tell me what's going on, so that then informs how I understand. Mm-hmm. So that's just one thing, or just translating findings into a catalogue, for example, from the exhibition, or a postcard, or the key takeaways.
Mm-hmm. And for you, those might be kind of everyday ways of thinking about it. But for some of us, traditional academics, we're not used to thinking about that. So it's great to hear about those ideas and how we bring them into our own practices. And I know somebody else was wanting to offer an idea too.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Mark about getting onto those conferences where you have a mix of people, and you can, you can't do it right now, but back in the good old days where we could, there's those discussions where you can just grab someone and say, look, I really like what you talked about then, or presenting yourself, or that kind of thing can be really a good way in. I know for us at VicHealth, we'll often have events where we invite people to come along and see to an event or see some presentation. So getting your name on lists, so you are in the loop of the organisations that you think you might have a good link with.
No, that's great. Thanks, Anne-Marie. And I see that there was another question about how ECRs can go about attracting our early career researchers, go about attracting funding from funders. And I think the kinds of things that you've all just talked about now are the ways in which early career researchers can start to build their partnership, build their networks, have themselves known. You know, the suggestions that Mark had about bringing people in to do presentations, about co-presenting, about what Gina and Anne-Marie have talked about, of going to the organisation and spending time listening to what the organisation has to say. That is not the realm of only experienced researchers. And I know we've got, you know, very experienced academics here today who are talking about the successes that they've had, but they've all started from that point where they have building up those relationships over time, going to those places, and that's part of their continuing work as well. So don't feel that if you're an early career academic that you're excluded from these things or you haven't been invited to them yet. It's part of your job to be thinking about how you can be actively connecting to these organisations, and now, especially in these times, how you kind of reframe the ways in which those sorts of networking opportunities can happen. Because, you know, as Simon pointed out, we have the whole world available to us now. Perhaps the time zones might be a little bit prohibitory for some things that we're doing, but that doesn't mean you can't ask people to record some short videos, for example. So we can be more flexible around the ways in which we start to do that networking and consider the people and groups with whom we'd like to network.
Amanda, can I just, sorry, I know we probably are running out of time,
No,
but just build on that very briefly. I mean, Mark alluded to this, you know, we met at a launch event for something that we were doing in partnership with the Victorian Department of Education, I don't know, 2015, Mark, something like that. I was in a completely different role, relatively junior. You know, Mark didn't have to make the time for me to have a chat, to get to know me, to sort of see where things are going. And so I think there's something about thinking about networking, not just in terms of the immediate kind of organizational need, but just, you know, building those trusting relationships with people, sharing what your knowledge is, hearing what they're concerned about, what they think about, right? Like Mark had no way of knowing when we were first getting to know each other that I was going to go along to work for Paul Ramsay Foundation. And it was only as a result of the fact of the trust that we had built up that I kind of thought, well, here's where I'm trying to take, you know, kind of the education work in Paul Ramsay, and then came back to Mark and said, let's start a conversation now about something specific. So I think there's a way of kind of making sure that you're not thinking about networking just in an instrumental way, but in a genuinely kind of wanting to participate with people to learn where, you know, what they care about, where they are, that then kind of can come to fruition sometimes 2 or 3 steps down the track and a number of years down the track as well. So I feel like that's an important sort of thread to pull through there, that it's not just who can I talk to for funding right now, yes, but genuine exchange of your knowledge and skill and the things that you're curious about, you know, and likewise, what are you curious about? What, you know, what are you working on? That kind of thing. So it's not just an instrumental kind of conversation, but a generative one that has chances for kind of long-term things to come to.
Yes, and that idea of listening as a really, really important part of learning, and that's something as academics we need to keep reminding ourselves to practice as well. So that's great. Thanks, John. And perhaps I can't see any more questions here that have come from participants, but in terms of rounding up what we're doing today, perhaps if I go through and ask each one of our panelists maybe for one tip that they have, maybe something that you would have liked to have said that you haven't had the chance to say yet, or something that you would like the people who are attending to go away thinking about. It might be something you've already said you want to re-emphasize, or it might be a new point. So if I just circle back around, and Kathy, is that okay? Just putting everybody on the spot now, to ask you, is there one thing that you think you'd like to end with or get people to think about as they're imagining their own industry partnerships and connections for the future?
I think I'd like to pick up on John's last point that, you know, just investing in people and spending time with people and getting to know them. I think you never know what's going to grow out of that, but also recognising that these things take time. you know, and a genuine mutually beneficial relationship where two parties are really interested in what both brings to the situation. It takes time to establish that. So don't be impatient and invest in the time that's needed.
Beautiful. Thanks, Kathy. Simon or Shelley? And Shelley?
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up on that idea of translating research findings into practice. I think it's particularly important in the education sector. We've got trying to make an impact with teachers. They're busy people concentrating on classroom practice. What's the format? What's the way that we can translate robust research into the everyday practice of teachers? So I think that's remains a big challenge for us.
Excellent. Thanks, Simon. And Shelley?
And yeah, for us, because we can't mandate what schools do. And so everything that we create can only be offered to the schools. And so we have to very humbly see ourselves as learners all the way through the process as well. And we often talk about we want, you know, informed global citizens and our children to be risk takers, but we need to be willing to both demonstrate those risks. For teachers and schools, as Simon said, they're really busy. They need to see some real practical outcomes. So in the end, we want to impact student outcomes in engagement, in student agency, as well as academic success. And so it's got to have that real tangible value for them to buy in, to be willing to take the risk, have that little go, to interrogate the data and maintain and establish a change of culture if that's what's demanded from them.
Thank you, Shelley. And Ruth?
Thanks. Yeah, I guess in terms of the researchers, just building on all those points as well, is really thinking about how you make yourself accessible and how you engage industry and make your research relevant to them. So, you know, really thinking about how can you translate those journal articles, those conference presentations into something more manageable and accessible for industry. And, you know, looking at, I know a number of researchers who successfully use blogs to do this. Social media is a really important platform for this these days. And going back to the question about ECRs, like I see ECRs doing this incredibly successfully, just getting their research out there and using that as a way to connect to industry in a means that's tangible and accessible. I think that's the key in terms of a good partnership with an industry partner. You can't be seen as an academic that just is, you know, seriously theoretical and doesn't understand real life concepts. So you have to be able to show that you're capable of doing that to be a sort of attractive prospect to work with. So really just focusing on how, you know, how can you get your message out cleanly and simply about what your research is and why it's important for industry to engage with it.
Great, thanks, Ruth. And Dina?
Thanks, Mandy. I guess, as I said before, that industry connections are so central to the work that I do. It informs, like, conversations I have everywhere I go, informs how I think about health education, how I think about critical health education and engagement. And so I think being up for the conversation is important, but I also think sometimes, like what we did our PhDs, it isn't always we don't always follow the same trajectory. We have to be open to that engagement with industry and industry needs, and we might just have to change our research approach. Not too much, because we still need that expertise, but we also can't preempt, I think, the research project. That we need to be open to thinking otherwise about the work that we're doing and build that in conversation with our partners. There's a real ethics and politics to that work, I think, that's really important.
True, that's true. Yeah, thanks, Dina. And Anne-Marie?
Thanks. I was just jotting down a few notes. I think the things I was thinking about is that you find really good nuggets when you keep your ear to the ground and you listen hard to the challenges that policy makers and practitioners are facing and the ideas they have as well, because they're not operating on automatic. They're problem solvers and solution finders as well. And I think a researcher can be a great catalyst to find the best way to find the solution. But I think some of the best research we've seen is where it's come from a true partnership from the very beginning, where a researcher and end user are communicating well and coming up with a shared understanding of how to go about solving the problem.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anne-Marie. And to John, please.
Yeah, I think if I think about the work of researchers in university, there's this great function that you play for society, which is knowledge generation, right? Like that's what the thing that you've got expertise in a particular thing, and like for the rest of us, like we really need that. We really value that, and so I think the way in which you think about like having that presented in ways that the rest of us can kind of work with and listen to and find valuable and kind of, again, I think it's just the thread that we're drawing through here is like all the value that you've got, can you find ways of just like helping that, get more and more and more and more uptake because of the way that you listen, because of the way that you partner, because of the questions that you ask that are pertinent to like people understanding like what is in the world and like what works on certain challenges that you know about.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. And Mark, your final words, please.
Yeah, I guess my closing thought is just the importance of humility. I think it's a thread that's gone through. It certainly connects with what John just said, but I think, that thing of listening first, listening more than speaking, of being more interested in other people's ideas than kind of your own, and other people's expertise. And I think that is, that's the way towards partnership and influence.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. And now I know we've reached 2:30, but we do have one more segment to go. So hang on with us if you possibly can, because we're going to talk about how we're moving to support you in the faculty to be able to build on these partnerships and build on what's happened today. If you have to leave, of course, we understand, but I'm going to hand over to Sharon now. And as I do, I just again, thanks so much, our presenters and the panel. And you can't see all of us clapping, but we are. So my hands are doing that for everybody. It's really fantastic to have the generosity of your sharing these experiences with us and to be able to participate, in this forum, to be able to help us more understand about your experiences and taking our own forward. So Sharon, can I hand over to you now? And I'm sorry for taking the extra time.
That's okay. Thank you so much to all our panelists. It's been a fantastic conversation, so thank you. So we've heard how some very successful partnerships have been formed in the faculty. So now I just wanted to briefly touch upon some funding opportunities that are available, both external and internal. Many of you will be very familiar with the ARC Linkage Projects scheme, a scheme that the faculty has been very successful in attracting funding from. And the scheme provides funding for projects involving at least one industry partner. And what I mean by industry partner, it's a non-tertiary organisation. And the projects are designed in partnership with the industry partner to address an issue identified by the partner. And you've obviously heard about how that process comes together through some of our partners today. When the applications are assessed 30% on benefit, so it's very important that you're able to demonstrate how the proposed project will benefit the partner and provide economic, social and cultural benefits to Australia. So who should apply? Early to mid-career researchers with evidence of track record with partners and other chief investigators. Again, the applications assess 25% on investigator track record. So it's very important that you're able to show over time how that track record has been developed. And you've heard today some ways that you can go about doing that. Such things as other funded research, professional development activities, running events together, publications, those sorts of things. Funding available between 50K to 500K. There's an expectation that partners provide cash and in-kind contribution. The partner organisation's combined eligible cash contribution must be at least 25% of the total funding requested from the ARC. Cash contributions vary between 15K to 40K per year is average. However, some organisations such as charities, museums and non-profit organisations are exempt from that cash contribution. But many of you might still be in the sort of early stage of developing some of those collaborations. And in recognition of that, this year we've decided to offer for the first time the faculty, an internally funded faculty grant, the Partnership Development Grant. Up to $10,000 is available to support and accelerate the development of an industry-focused grant application. Those applications will close on the 24th of September and you apply online as you do with our other internal grants. So I encourage you all to have a look on the internet, have a look at the guidelines and you know, seriously think about applying to that scheme. And if you've got any questions, please contact me in the Faculty Research Office. Thank you.
Sharon. Thanks, Sharon. And you do a fantastic job in the Faculty Research Office. They're not only in supporting people as they're developing their grant applications, but also in the tricky stages after they've already won them as well, and managing that. So thanks so much. Thank you to everybody. This is the end of our session for today. We're just 5 minutes over time, so hopefully that's not too much of a problem for people moving on to other things today. Again, it's fantastic to have so much interest and fantastic to have the panelists to be able to help us to be able to think through these areas. Feel free to contact the research office if you have ideas about partnerships that you want to develop. This is not the end of the conversation, and we've been talking a bit in the research office about how we can do a part 2 to some of these seminars where you have an opportunity then to come together in a kind of workshop mode where we can work you know, in small groups to talk about some of the issues. So thanks again, and if I could just ask the panelists to stay online for a couple of minutes after everybody else has left, that would be great. And see you, hopefully you can get out into a bit of the lovely sunshine today as well. Goodbye, and thanks very much for coming along, everyone.